Hey everyone, welcome to Nerding IO. I'm JD, and we actually got a request in the comments to go through Hume custom voice. So we're going to go through that, and then I also noticed that they came out with a Flutter example, which I've been making some games in. So we're going to go through both of those today. With that, let's get started.
All right, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to go through the Hume dashboard and we can actually create a voice. So if you go into voices and then you have all these default base voices that we can actually use in our creation of a voice. And you can actually see on the custom voices that, it's experimental. It's really as easy as clicking this button, but they also have a guide and API resources. So we're going to take a look at when we actually create a voice here. All we really need to do is have a name, and then we can see what all these different variables are, as well as down here test. If you really want to understand what those variables are or attributes, you can actually come to the guide itself. There's a full walkthrough here to kind of talk about how you can create these voices. But you can see each attribute is supposed to give you almost like a range in how the voice and tone is going to be reflected. And so what we're going to do is we'll create a voice through the GUI, but I also wanted to show you that you can do all of this through the API. So you can actually create a custom voice, maybe based on the content and the parameters that you want to associate with that as well. So for instance, not only can you list your custom voices, but you can create your custom voice. And then I actually thought this was kind of interesting. Not only can you create your custom voice through the model here and even like test it, you can actually create a new version of the existing voice. So take that voice and then change the parameters based on what you've already been using. So it doesn't necessarily edit it, it's just creating a new version, which I thought was super interesting. So let's go back and we'll actually just go through and create a voice. So we're going to say maybe masculine doesn't have a range, it's just masculine or feminine. So we're going to say masculine. We'll maybe say we're a little bit assertive, much more calm. We'll say a little more buoyancy, more tight, more clear, and we'll say more smooth. And then I say a little more rigorous, and then we can actually come down here and test the voice. And so again, what happened is we actually took this off the very first base voice of the default. So we're going to leave our settings here, and we're actually going to go and change that. We'll do Sunny.
Real quick, everyone, if you haven't already, please remember to like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Also, please go check out Text Yourself. It's a simple application that I built that helps keep me on track. All you have to do is SMS different tasks and reminders that you need to be sent back to yourself. With that, let's get back to it.
And so one thing I noticed is if you're playing and you try and change it, it'll automatically just stop because it's going to reconfigure and generate the new voice over again. So now what you can do is go ahead and create, and you actually have a voice, and you can either add it to a config right here, or we can actually go into the config and create, like this will create a new one, or we can go into an existing config and actually choose what we're going to do. So we're actually going to take an existing config and we'll say based on the last one, see even here we have Sunny, I can get my config ID and I can even run this in the playground. But what we're going to do is choose, then there's an existing custom voices. This is the voice that we just created. And now we have this assigned to our configuration that we actually have already built. And if you don't know how to build these configurations, you check out the video above and it'll help you get started in Hume. We're also going to make sure that we have a newer model. You can have Claude or Gemini or even use the default model. We're going to stick with 4.0 mini just for ease of use, since that's what we used in the previous video, and we want to make sure that we have EV2, which is a more stable release, and it's also multi-model. So now what we're going to do is we'll go ahead and save this configuration, and we're going to load this into the Flutter example. And so if you go to the Hume examples, they actually have this Flutter example that you can download. And you can notice that you have Android, iOS, and even web all associated in one project, which is super interesting. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to pull this down, where we'll get it set up, and we're actually going to run the emulator. I'm going to use it on an Android device because that's what I've been leveraging lately. There's nothing that says you can't use iOS or even the web. And so another thing is, if you're using the Android emulator, you want to make sure you have a virtual microphone and follow these instructions. But really all you have to do is clone this down, and we're going to jump over to the project and see. So all we're going to do is we're actually going to just run this. The first thing that you have to do is make sure once you clone it, you actually do a Flutter pub get. This basically installs all the dependencies, and let's actually look at what some of the dependencies are. So it really just uses the right here, the WebSockets, right? We know that Hume is actually doing using WebSockets to pass through the text and then generate the audio. Again, this is how we're actually going to listen to the audio. And so if we look at the environment variables, really all we need is our Hume ID and our Hume config. And so you remember when we were over in the dashboard, we actually had our config ID right here. We just have to grab that and we can put it in our environment variable. I also thought that was pretty interesting. You can actually have a way to authenticate through your URL if you want to. So all we're going to do now is we are going to do Flutter run. And this might take a few minutes, especially if you're doing this for the first time. It might even take like up to 5 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and pause. All right, and so now this is actually loaded. Again, you'll probably see a different message since this is the second or third time that I've actually run this. And so you have a list of commands here that you can actually use where you can run the Flutter portion, right? So you can actually reload, restart, or actually list any other commands. So the other thing that we're going to look at is we need to make sure that we have Android Studio running. You can see that I have it running here. I'm just going to use the Pixel 7. And then it'll launch the Flutter EVI. And so now what we can do is we can actually have a conversation. And again, this should sound like to create our YouTube voice that we created. So we're going to go ahead and connect. And again, you can see it'll take a second. I'm just going to say only this time. I'm going to mute myself so that way I'm waiting for it to boot up. Can you give me the latest news on LLMs? Can you give me the latest news on LLMs?
Here are some recent updates on large language models. 1. A newsfeed with the latest news and updates on LLMs has been created recently. It discusses whether LLMs can be considered thinking machines and talks about the silent revolution of intelligence. You can find more details. Here are some of the latest updates on language models. Earlier today, there was an interesting article discussing whether language models are thinking machines, highlighting the silent revolution in intelligence. For more details, check the LLM newsfeed available. A report mentioned that language models have evolved to become increasingly powerful and sophisticated. You can find the latest insights at AI.
So we're going to go ahead and disconnect. But what was interesting about that is it actually came through a different audio, and that is also because of how the emulator is set up. So, but it was using our custom voice, and just like that, you're able to have a custom voice. In this case, we used it in Flutter. There's no different if you want to use it in Next.js or in Python. They also have React Native and a bunch of other SDKs. It's one of the reasons I really like Hume is that they have great examples and excellent documentation. It's super easy to get this set up. So,
All right, that's it for today. What we went through was the Hume custom voice, and then we actually set up a configuration and then turned it on into the Flutter example. And with that, happy nerding.